Hi, my name is Ashley Brangers, and I'm going to talk about the use of historical allusions within multiple pieces of modern poetry and how the allusions help develop each author's purpose. The assertion we will focus on in this video is, in Wilfred Owen's poem Dulce et Decorum Est, and William Butler Yeats's poem The Second Coming, historical allusions are used to reveal the author's feelings of disillusionment caused by the events of World War I. The first poem we're going to look at is Dulce et Decorum Est by Wilfred Owen. The type of historical allusion in this particular poem has to do with references from fighting in World War I. During the war, many Americans felt like it was a true honor to fight for their country. From this idea, the Latin saying Dulce et Decorum Est pro patria mori, which translates to, "It is sweet and right to die for your country," became a very popular belief among the Americans who were not fighting in the war. Throughout the poem, you can tell that the author does not agree with this saying. We begin to see this with the quote, "My friend, you would not tell with such high zest." The word zest is seen as being overly enthusiastic and energetic about something. Many of the Americans who did not participate in the war were really enthusiastic about the war and wanted to win. These same people were the ones who saw it as an honor to fight and die for your country. But the men who actually fought in the war did not see it this way. This was because they had already witnessed the horror scenes of war and had seen the damage war can cause to people. Because the narrator says, "You cannot tell with such high zest," we can see that the narrator is someone who had experienced these awfulness of war and is opposed to the saying. In this quote, it is telling people that if they saw the horrors of war just like the men who actually did fight, they would not be as enthusiastic about fighting in the war. This quote makes the reader stop and think about their viewpoint on the war and whether or not they think it is sweet and right to die for your country. If they do think it is, it makes them feel a bit guilty for thinking this without experiencing the war like the men who had to fight. Through this, the author is trying to tell people to stop romanticizing war because it is a lot more dangerous than what it seems like if you just live in America and not go actually fight. The next quote from this poem is, "The old lie, dulce et decorum est, pro patria mori." The words "old lie" makes the reader think it is a lie that has been told to many people over a long period of time. Because of this association, the reader begins to question why this lie has been told and who it has been told to. The author does this to suggest that the government and propaganda have been lying and telling people of America that it is sweet and right to die for your country, so more people will be in support of the war and will be willing to fight. By using these two allusions to World War I, the author represents the disillusionment which he believes many Americans went through during World War I. The saying, "It is sweet and right to die for your country," seems true at the beginning of the poem and to the people who did not experience the war, but in reality, the author wants the reader to know that these people were disillusioned to the fact that the war is dangerous and causes a lot of suffering. In the next poem, The Second Coming by William Butler Yeats, the historical allusions reference the biblical time period. Yeats believed history happens in 2,000-year cycles and the current cycle was about to end. At the beginning of the poem, the way Yeats describes the new revelation, the reader would be able to assume that this revelation would be good. But the author uses disillusionment to show his thoughts on what will actually happen. The first quote is, "Surely some revelation is at hand, surely the second coming is at hand." The word revelation refers to the revelation of Jesus Christ, which is a positive occurrence. The second coming, which the author talks about, is associated with Jesus coming again to judge the world and to save us from sin, which would be good for humanity. Because of this, the reader begins to assume the second coming Yeats is describing will bring goodness. The reader begins to have a positive attitude towards the rest of the poem. The author makes the reader think this will be a positive thing to begin a contrast which will be developed in the latter half of the poem. The second quote contrasts the positivity of the first quote. The quote states, 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. The word nightmare has a negative connotation and is associated with something that scares you and prevents you from sleeping. The author connects nightmare to rocking cradle. This rocking cradle is referring to the cradle of Jesus Christ. Because the author connected nightmare to Jesus' cradle, it starts to seem as if Jesus' cradle was the cause of the nightmares. Also, in horror movies, as soon as the baby cradle begins to rock, it always seems like that's when everything bad begins to happen. Because of these associations, it makes the reader afraid of the future and what will happen if a second revelation does happen. It also makes the reader question Jesus because he is supposed to be the one who saves us, but he seems to be the one causing nightmares. We as the readers know that Yeats wrote this poem around the time of the end of World War I, so we can assume that the Second Coming also has to do with the war. Just like in the poem, people during World War I believed the war would be a good thing which would destroy the evils of the world. But in reality, the war continued to bring about more evil. By contrasting the author's initial expectation of the Second Coming to the reality of the Second Coming, the author reveals the disillusionment which is felt about World War I. As we can see, both the authors represent the sense of disillusionment Americans felt during the World War. They both represent how people had positive attitudes about the war in the beginning, but these attitudes soon shifted towards the end of the war. Although we do see this similarity, each author portrays two different ways Americans were disillusioned throughout the war. In Dulce et Decorum Est, the author suggests how American people were disillusioned to the reality of the war. These people believed it was a good thing to die for your country, but the people who actually fought did not feel this way. Yeats portrayed a different type of disillusionment in his poem, The Second Coming. He showed how most American people believed the war would be able to destroy the evil that other countries were bringing into the world. But, in reality, the war brought about more conflict and suffering. In conclusion, we as the reader can see how these two authors used historical allusions to suggest disillusionment throughout World War I. Thank you for watching my presentation, and I hope you learned a little bit more about how authors of modern poetry use historical allusions to develop their purpose. Thank you.